G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. I am joined today by a guest. Once again, we haven't had a guest in a while. Her name is Lili. We are keeping her identity relatively secret for reasons that will become apparent soon. We're here to talk about some pretty serious stuff today. So welcome to the show, Lili. I'll leave that as the introduction for now and we'll get into it. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you, Pietro, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to hear it, and hopefully our viewers are equally intrigued by this conversation. So, let's get straight into it. So, you are, this topic that we're going to talk about is Syria, the war in Syria, the regime change in Syria, and all of that that's been happening in the last sort of 10, 12 years over there. As Australians, we don't tend to have too much in-depth knowledge about any of these foreign conflicts. We sort of get a few headlines in the news, but it also gets to the point where, our foreign involvement and US foreign involvement in a lot of these conflicts, there's so many of these in so many varied areas that it's difficult to have an actual real understanding of what's happening there, and I'm certainly guilty of this as well. So I think it's good that you can talk to us today and tell us a little bit more in depth about what's happening there and exactly how governments and the state in general is allowing for these things and is actually fomenting a lot of the violence and the horrible stuff that's happening. Let's start broadly. If you want to give us a little bit of a rundown of what exactly has been happening in Syria over however long you think is relevant.
Look, I think it started a very long time ago, at least in the 1960s. But if we just go back to 2011, just after Libya, and there was what was called an Arab Spring, it was termed. And I guess some people rose up for revolution. And in the media that we see, this continues to be called a revolution. However, for Syrians themselves and other people in the Middle East, they saw very quickly that this is not a revolution. This is a Western-backed proxy war for regime change. And we can see that clearly now with information that's been, available to the public. The WikiLeaks Syria files, for example, in particular Hillary Clinton's email. It goes into regime change in Syria. And we also, it's now public knowledge about Timber Sycamore. If you Google that, you'll see it's, basically in black and white that the US has sponsored these terrorists to enact regime change in Syria.
Okay, well, let's unpack a little bit there. So starting in 2011, they started to, the underhanded beginnings of regime change before eventually storming in 2014, I believe. They actually went in with troops, as did Australia.
Yes.
Why is it that the US was interested in causing this regime change to begin with? Who was in charge? Who were they trying to replace them with? What was the thinking there?
Yeah, so the Assad family was in charge. So it used to be Bashar al-Assad took control of, not Bashar, Hafez, his dad, took control in the 1960s. He was a military guy and he was a socialist. The Ba'ath Party was in charge. Now, when you hear socialist, it's different in the Middle East, and I'll explain why. So he took control of Syria. There'd been lots and lots of military coups that had been taking place for the last 20 odd years before then. And then he took control and it remained stable until 2011. Of course, there were the hidden things that were going on, and the reason for that is Israel. There's always been sort of that threat on your doorstep. But since Hafez al-Assad took control, it had remained pretty stable. Now, when we talk about socialism, Hafez al-Assad's party was the Ba'ath Party. It is a socialist party, but socialism in the Middle East is different to socialism in the West. And the reason for socialism being popular is because since at least the 1900s, since probably the 1700s, the West has been trying to infiltrate the Middle East. And in the 1900s, when oil was, discovered, it's been a bigger push to install governments that are pliable to the British, first the British and then the US interests. Economics 101, oil makes the world go round. That was literally what my economics teacher at university taught us in the first lesson. So, and it still holds true. So when we say socialism, basically it's a mechanism to prevent the West coming in, taking the resources, taking it out of the country and making the West richer, or millionaires richer, billionaires richer. The whole concept of it is to keep the wealth within the country and to provide for the people of the country. In Syria, we had free healthcare, free education, including tertiary. Food was subsidized. Everything was produced in-house, so they were self-sufficient. They don't have big brands, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, KFC. There's no globalization. They produce everything in-house. They also had petrol subsidized, and the cost of living was very, very cheap. So, as a Lebanese-Syrian, I'd go to Lebanon, get rorted paying in US dollars, and then go to Syria and pay a fraction of the price and, live like a king. So it was always well known that it was a cheap place, a safe place. There was no crime, virtually no crime. The downside of that was that it gets called a brutal regime, in that if you're opposing the government, then, you will be dealt with, you'll be imprisoned, you may be tortured, I don't know. There was some corruption in the government, especially closer to Bashar al-Assad, who took over after his dad. It was a rising corruption within the government. Interestingly, a lot of those heads of government are now working for the new president, self-appointed president of Syria. So that is an interesting thing to take note of when we get later down the track and we talk about revenge killings and things like that. So in terms of the Ba'ath Party, it was more of an Arab nationalist party. They wanted to unite the Levant and, make Arabia great again. And unfortunately, we are here today after a brutal 14 years of Western-sponsored terrorism in Syria and sanctions that have crippled the country. And where it's pretty grim for minorities in Syria.
Yeah. So let's get there. So that brings us to 2011. Up until 2011, so you're saying this Syria that has existed with the kind of protectionist socialist government had been a good place to live. In 2011, it becomes apparent, or is it in 2011 the Western underhanded sort of funding starts?
Yes, I think they piggybacked off Libya and thought, we'll go in there 2 weeks, Assad will fall. One thing they didn't know about Syrians is that Syrians are very, very patriotic. They're well known for their patriotism. Syria first, and Syria is a secular country. Unlike Lebanon, you have to have your religion on your ID card. And then if you go and apply for a job, well, what religion are you? You're not Maronite, you're not Sunni, you're not this, you're that. Okay, well, you don't get the job. So in Syria, it's secular. Your religion is not on your ID card. It's equal rights for all. It's a diverse community, society. We've got, Armenian refugees, we've got Kurds, we've got Palestinians, we've got Iraqis. So Syria was home to many refugees, many different religions. Not sure if you know, but Christianity was born. The word Christian was first used in Syria, Antioch. There were 2 million Christians in Syria. Now there's something like 20,000, hardly any. They've all migrated. Yeah. So it's just a very, very tiny minority. But you would walk down the street and there would be a lady in a burqa and a girl in a miniskirt, and that was fine. You wouldn't even ask someone's religion. You wouldn't speak to someone differently because of their religion. Like it's actually disgusting to be talking about people in terms of religion, what religion they are. Similar to, I guess Australia in that way, you wouldn't meet someone and say, oh, hey, what religion are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in 2011, let's take it back to 2011. So the first couple of days, first week, people thought it was a genuine revolution. They wanted reform in the government, and they were out protesting. What happened was it was quickly hijacked, and there were people in the crowd shooting at police. What happened after that was these people in the crowd, or these groups, went and ambushed police stations, stole their weapons, and started, that was the first part of getting the weapons, and then they started shooting at people in the crowds and then blaming the army. In that first week, a personal story of mine, a family friend of ours was killed. He's a farmer. He was going from his farm to the town to sell his produce, and he was captured by people he knows. And he was basically dragged through the streets, and then he was slit from neck to navel and put in a garbage bag in the city square. So it was evident to people on the ground, to Syrians, that this isn't a revolution. And that's why it's taken so long and so much effort. The most expensive regime change war, 50 billion plus just from the US, let alone Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey. It's now out there that it is the most expensive regime change war to have taken place. And here we are today. The Syrians held on for a really, really, really long time. As I said, they're a very patriotic bunch, or were a very patriotic bunch, Syria first. But unfortunately, it's succumbed now to much greater powers.
Yeah. So, first of all, so this, for example, the attack on your friend, was he chosen like specifically for speaking out, or was it just kind of like a method of trying to cause terror among civilian kind of thing?
He was killed because he's Alawite, no other reason. So he was killed because he was Alawite. And the ideology of these terrorists is that if you're an Alawite, then you deserve death. Where you might not know this, but I'm a member of the Alawite community, and these groups consider us to be apostates and heretics because we've known Islam, and we've consciously decided to steer away from it. That is their perspective, and so that makes us eligible for killing and eligible to be robbed, to be raped, to have any sort of horrific crime committed against us. They believe they'll go to heaven for that. So this is their ideology. And this ideology mostly was born around the 14th century by a scholar, a Muslim scholar. I say that in inverted marks because I don't think you're really studying Islam if you're a proponent of killing anyone. Ibn Taymiyyah is the guy's name, and he created fatwas to kill Alawites, and saying that it's fine to kill us, fine to rob us, all of those things. So do whatever you want to them. They're worse than the devil kind of thing. So you've got these brainwashed individuals on the ground committing horrific crimes to scare people, but also because they believe that they're going to heaven for doing it. Obviously, some of them are on drugs. They're getting paid in US dollars, and they're getting armed with Toyota pickup trucks, and they're getting women, sex, drugs, and jihad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's two things going on in a way. There's kind of like the religious fundamentalism of targeting the Alawites, and the US-backed sort of trying to overthrow the government, which is Bashar al-Assad was either Alawite or Alawite friendly. Is that correct?
Yeah, so he was an Alawite. I don't know, maybe he's not alive. He's an Alawite, but their family is actually very well known to be extremely secular. So they're not religious. And his wife was Sunni, which is the branch that Wahhabism comes from. But she's not a Wahhabi. So like and his brother was married to also a Sunni, and some members of the family married to Christians. They're not religious.
Okay.
They're known to be in their history as a family to be secular.
Yeah.
And a lot of our media says that Alawites were elites in Syria, and it's absolutely not true. You would have had, some of his friends or other rich families that were Alawites, but a lot of his cabinet was Sunni, Christian. It was very mixed. And some of the poorest people in Syria are Alawites. Like, you look at the videos of the people in Al Rusafa, like in the villages whose kids have been killed. And they don't even, like, you look at the houses that they're talking in front of. There isn't even a door. It's stones. They're sitting on plastic chairs. They are the poorest people that you've ever met. When I was 21, I went to Syria and visited my family, and I went and stayed with my auntie in Latakia in one of those villages. And her shower was a bucket, a tap, and a stool. And, when I asked her, what would you like me to bring you from Australia? She said Panadol. And this is who lives in those mountains. The infrastructure is very poor. Alawites were very much, very, very poor. And so they were encouraged to work in civil service. They were the ones on the front lines during the war. I think it's something like 750,000 Alawite men were killed in the war on the front lines. And of course, there was conscription in Syria. So they had to serve unless they were studying and unless they were the only son in the family. They had to serve in the army, plus it paid a wage, and people are poor, so it's, they're definitely not elitist. There weren't any special rules for Alawites. There were Alawites in some of those prisons as well that were getting tortured and beaten and disappearing. We weren't exempt from the rules.
Yeah. So just so we can kind of conceptualize, what was prior to the war, or even during the war, what was the kind of numbers of the Alawite community in Syria?
Well, it's only 2% of the population, and the population was around 25 million. So only talking about a couple of million people. It is a minority group. It's not a majority by any means. The majority are Sunni Muslims, and then you've got Christians. You've got other branches of minorities like Druze. And Ismailis, Murshidis, Yazidis. As I said, there's a big diverse mix of religions in Syria, lots of minorities.
Yeah. Okay. And is that number diminished now? Because you haven't mentioned yet, but you obviously lived in Syria and fled because you live in Australia, and you fled. I would imagine that your story is not necessarily unique. If there is this targeting, if there was this targeting, which we'll get to, but it has continued, is that significantly smaller now, that population?
I would think so. I know that 100,000 Alawites have fled Syria to Lebanon just in the last few months. So, and the stats say about 1,500 Alawites were killed just in 3 days in the March massacre, the massacre that took place on the 7th of March. However, from what we know of our relatives and family in Syria, the figure is at least 30 to 40,000. We can't even get proper figures because there are mass graves, there are stolen ID cards. So, when the authority forces would come to their homes, they'd take their phones, their gold, their ID cards, and sometimes the titles to their homes. So they would take all of those things. So we don't really even know how many are displaced within Syria. We know that there's about 100,000 in Lebanon, and we don't really know exactly how many are dead, but we know that it's thousands. So that's as far as we know. In terms of my background, I was actually born in Lebanon, and I fled the civil war there. And once again, there was targeting because I'm Alawite. A quarter of our building was blown off. My mum was shot twice. We lived across the road from a hospital. I've seen people burned alive. I've seen, horrific things as a child due to the civil war. And it was mainly, this is an interesting twist that it was Hamas, what's now known as Hamas.
Right.
Yeah, my brother had a grenade thrown at him as a child, and luckily it missed. And eventually we decided that we were going to move to Australia because we just wanted to be safe.
Yeah, because you don't typically get grenades thrown at you here, thankfully.
Exactly. So it's yeah, and we used to, my parents were wealthy in Lebanon, and we were lucky enough to be able to leave whenever things would break out. But then there were times that you just got caught, you're stuck, and you can't really go anywhere, and you just basically live in the basement of your building and hope that things would calm down soon.
Yeah. So if we go back to kind of the timeline of what we were looking at, so 2011, the civil war funded by Western powers starts. In 2013, I believe, is when Obama was kind of starting to drawing the red line that if they cross this and if they use chemical weapons, then we will interfere. And then there was the very suspicious use of chemical weapons by Bashar al-Assad, which I think that was in August, and which made no sense from his point of view after having seen what happened in Libya, after having been given these warnings. Why would he do this at this particular time? But it allowed the excuse, and obviously we call it a false flag, and I think it's been demonstrated to be completely evidence that is true. The Americans and the Australians, we go in and we are involved. So in this time frame here, are you still in Syria for all of this part?
No, I wasn't. I haven't. The last time I went to Syria was in 2010, so I haven't dared to go back since then. But
Right.
I have a lot of family who are there, and a lot of family who did continue to go during that time. And it was really difficult to know, even for us, what was happening on the ground, because everything that we saw in Western media was almost the opposite of what was actually going on. A lot of massacres were being committed and then blamed on the government. So it was really difficult to know. And I have a cousin of mine who was working on some initiatives that Bashar al-Assad's wife was part of, some projects to reduce unemployment and, progress the country. And she had been going back and forth and was telling me, Lili, this isn't what's happening. It's crazy. It's the opposite. So even for me, it was difficult to know what the truth was of what was happening, because you would see these white helmets who were actually funded by the CIA and MI6. They were pulling people out from under rubble, and they were in hospitals with children, all propaganda videos. Al Jazeera was showing all this stuff, age 8+, and this is another thing to talk about, is the media in the Middle East and who owns it, who runs it, and what their agenda is. For example, like Al Jazeera is basically Qatar. Qatar is basically the Muslim Brotherhood, so that's why you see a lot of coverage in Palestine. But then when you see Syria, they're all for this new government. They're all for, it's completely washed out, and whatever narrative they want you to believe is what they show you.
Okay.
So in going back to 2014, so it was starting to get a little bit murky. We didn't know what was actually going on the ground, because we were in the West. We were seeing all these things pointing to the government, the then government, the Bashar al-Assad government, committing all these horrific crimes against people, against his own people. And we heard the line, he's killing his own people again. So it was really difficult to know what was going on if you didn't have actual family members there. And there were some really good journalists that went in that had gone in to cover Assad's crimes, and then realized that it was actually the terrorists that were committing these crimes against the people, and people were like, save us from the terrorists. One in particular, Vanessa Beeley, had gone in to Douma, which is the site of the chemical attack. And she's like, oh, I'm here to cover this. They're like, what? What are you talking about? Please save us from the terrorists. And, she had gone in to cover crimes that Assad had committed, and found that it was actually the terrorists that were committing these crimes. And we saw from the chemical weapons attacks, the hole in the roof was smaller than the canister. Like, it was really silly things like that. And, there was actually a whistleblower that's written a book that came out earlier this year, a couple of months ago, that, there was a whole committee sent in to investigate these chemical weapons attacks. And when they found that there was no evidence that the Syrian government had done it, they changed the entire committee and got a whole new committee in to write it up again. So, a lot of things that we didn't know back then, but have now become apparent. There were many journalists who were in Syria that were there to cover the brutal Assad regime, and then who turned around and realized that this is actually terrorist attacks. One of them, Theo Padnos, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's written a couple of books now. He was kidnapped by Al-Qaeda, and he was, given between al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and a few other factions over 2 years. So he was a prisoner for 2 years, and he talks about what he experienced and what he went through. And it's quite clear that these are terrorists, and their goal, the henchmen on the ground just want to kill Alawites, and the powers that are funding, arming, training them are the bigger powers, the US and its allies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that takes us to the war and the actual boots on the ground involvement of the West. And then, this is where, because Assad only flees Syria. Was it last year? Was it the year before? I can't remember now exactly when it was.
It was December 2024.
Okay.
So last year.
So end of last year. So very, very, very recently. That's even more recently than I remembered. What happens in the period in between that and him finally fleeing? Because he's in Russia now. You mentioned before you said if he is alive, we don't know if he's alive.
We really don't know. I mean, we haven't heard. There was one statement that was released, and it was verified as being from him. That apparently, so December 8th, 9th, he was apparently still in Syria.
So the war is going all this time. Sorry, the war is going all this time, or it's
around 2017, Syria kind of regained control of Syria, and people had fled from the terrorist controlled areas, in particular Idlib and Deir ez-Zor. So the people that did want to live under terrorist rule kind of fled from there, went to government controlled areas. And pretty much Assad said, you take Idlib, govern it the way you want. Just stay away from us. You want to have your Islamic State, have it there. And he even offered amnesty to, because initially it was called the Free Syrian Army. Syrians who were then supporting it back then, thinking it's a Free Syrian Army, kind of changed their minds when they saw these guys cheering when the US Navy ships came in. They're like, hang on a second. I thought we were freeing Syria. What is the US doing here? So they kind of went, no, this is definitely not a revolution. We don't want to be part of it. Obviously, a minority did. But Syria managed to regain control. They asked, obviously, Iran and Russia to help them out. And so they did. Those countries helped Syria regain control of Syria. And there was still even Bashar al-Assad had given amnesty to people that had committed one terrorist act, were released from prison. Like people, the US was, and the West was like, oh, you're a brutal dictator. These innocent people are in jail, and So he gave amnesty to those people, even to the people who were in the Free Syrian Army. He said that if you surrender, if you lay down your arms, we'll reintegrate you back into society and you can live a normal life. And then those that didn't want to be part of normal society, they were transported in these green buses to Idlib. They weren't killed, they weren't imprisoned. You want to have your Sharia law, you want to have your Islamic State, go have it there. And you can, if you look at a map of Syria, Idlib is sort of on the very, very far eastern side, side of Syria. The coast is here, and then Idlib is on the eastern side. And it's quite a big area. So Syria mainly had regained control, but the Syrians themselves, everything had gone up in price. Like it was 20 times the price to buy bread. Petrol, they had to start becoming creative with petrol. Their wheat had been stolen by the US. So Syria is a big producer of wheat. And so all the wheat fields were taken. The factories, in going back to the chemical weapons attack where they said it was sarin gas, so made from chlorine, the chlorine factories were actually taken by the Turks at the beginning, so in 2011. And they also killed a lot of scientists, a lot of, thinkers, similar things that we've seen in recent times where they kill all the scientists so that there's no sort of development of anything, any type of weapon that could be a big risk. And the chlorine factories were taken apart and moved over to Turkey. So there wasn't even that. And the economy had been so hollowed out, like the sanctions were crippling. They couldn't rebuild. They couldn't get materials to rebuild homes. It was, that dire, and things became very expensive. The cost of living was very expensive. We had to send money over to our families there so that they can afford to live, so that they can afford to eat. Yeah. But, education and healthcare was still free. So the economy itself had been hollowed out. You're talking like 15 years of war. People were tired. The economy was hollowed out. People just wanted to eat. And, then all of a sudden, when we were in a position of what seemed to be strength, it kind of all shifted. And if you look at the geopolitics of what was happening at the time, Hezbollah, Israel.
So this is, now we're in 2024.
Now we're in 2024, yep. And the statement from Bashar al-Assad, the supposed statement from Bashar al-Assad says that he was in an airbase in Latakia, a Russian airbase, Hmeimim, there's about 10,000 Alawites sheltering there at the moment, that have been displaced from their homes and are fearful for their lives. So he says he was still there up until the last moment. There was never any intention to leave. And then the airbase was being attacked, and it seemed like he was going to be taken out. So I guess Russia evacuated him. That's why all of his things were still in his home, their family photos, their dinner plates, their everything. And people, you saw videos of scum of the earth, or people coming in and taking their dinner plates and their family photos, and look at this, I'm walking out with this, and looting the presidential palace. So it seemed like it was not a planned move. There was talk that between Qatar, Russia and Syria, there was some discussions about Bashar al-Assad stepping down from his role and someone else leading the country. But it seems like this happened unexpectedly and before that managed to happen. The other thing with that is, people say, this revolution, the revolutionaries were successful. They didn't fight anybody. Everybody laid down their arms, and it seemed like it was a big coup. So in this statement that he's released, and from people that we know in Syria, there was a communications blackout. Okay. So the commands weren't reaching the soldiers on the front line. And so it was actually more of a coup than it was a revolution. And it's definitely not an organic revolution. There's something like 40,000 foreign fighters, Chechnya, Uyghurs, Moroccans, Saudis, you name it. They're all in Syria now. And initially Trump had said something like, oh, the foreign troops have to go. And now all of a sudden, no, the foreign troops can stay. They can stay. All these terrorists can stay in Syria now. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, that brings us to now. So now, as of what was it? You said December 2024.
Yeah.
There is a new government. So, in the mix of all these foreign military, so who is the new government? And are they? Well, I'm going to give a leading question here. Are they worse?
Well, the thing is, we all cheered for democracy in Syria, and now we have a self-elected president. So, a self-elected president who essentially has changed the constitution. So he's basically changed the constitution so that he is actually an actual authoritarian. So he gets to decide everyone in government. So he picks 1/3, and then the remaining 2/3, he appoints people to choose who they appoint. So
Right.
It's like essentially
yeah.
he's appointed everybody. So it's a true dictatorship, and he's self-appointed. Supposedly this guy is Syrian from way back. Interestingly, he says he's from the Golan Heights. The Shaddar family have said, we don't know this guy. There was something that came out that they said, don't know this guy. This guy happened to be in Camp Booker, which is where ISIS was born, and with what's his name? It slipped my mind. Al-Baghdadi. So
Okay,
he was 2IC of ISIS, okay, and then he was sent to Syria, I think a couple of days before the Arab Spring. He was sent to Syria. He made such an interesting development because he'd been in Iraq before. He was sent to Syria.
He's like the Forrest. He's like the Forrest Gump of all the worst places you can be. Forrest Gump turns up at all these super memorable moments in US history. He's the equivalent, but for the worst moments and places.
Exactly. And he's sent to Syria to start up Al Qaeda's branch in Syria, which was later called Al Nusra Front, and he headed that up. Now he kind of went quiet between 2017 and 2024. And it's very interesting what's happened during that time. And closer towards the end of 2024, there was some uprisings in Idlib where they didn't want him to be their leader. So it wasn't all peace for him, but it's really interesting, and I have my own thoughts on who I think he is, or at least who he's been groomed to be, because he was on the wanted list for the US. Like up until earlier this year, there was a $10 million bounty on his head, and then all of a sudden now, what does Trump say? Oh, this guy, he's a strong man. He's worked for some rough organizations, and there was a meme that goes, those rough organizations were ISIS and Al Qaeda.
Well, the only rougher organization than that is the US government. So
absolutely, and my belief and what leads to my belief is fact, and like Al Qaeda is created by the US, and even if it's not created by them, they're funded by them, they're armed by them, they're trained by them, logistical support, all of it. Hooray, we've now got democracy in Syria. Women have to wear a burkini on the beach. The theory of evolution's been removed from textbooks. Female judges have all been sacked. Women can't make rational decisions. And anything about female queens in history has been removed, like Queen Zenobia. Palmyra is such a big part of Syria. And during the war, the terrorists actually destroyed 1/3 of Palmyra. I was lucky enough to see it before then. And, destroying history, it echoes with some other ideologies that are very parallel to this.
Burning books or something, yeah.
burning books, burning trees, stealing farms, stealing land, all of this stuff. it's very, very sad at the moment. You know, every day I'm seeing, you know, photos of girls and women that have been abducted, and of young men that have been shot, and children, infants, having been killed. It's really, really tragic. And I guess the Western world doesn't know, the normal person doesn't know, and the powers that be don't care.
Yeah. And so it is it officially Sharia law country now from the top down? Um, is that the official terminology, I guess?
I don't know if they're trying to act like they're not. So
Okay.
in the Constitution, there's some contradictions that they've made, like, oh, you know, everybody's treated equally, but if you don't follow all divine religions are protected.
Yeah.
Except they don't regard Alawites and other minorities as divine religions.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
they regard us as apostates. So that means, like, it's very.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think they're
So
trying
in practice, it is effectively Sharia law,
yeah.
and yeah, the fundamentalism.
Well, that's it. That was their aim. You know, ISIS. They wanted to create an Islamic state. So, and that's the same people who are. You know, it's just they've had a merger and acquisition. It's now called HTS, you know, but it's the same people
Yeah.
that were called Nusra, Al Qaeda, other smaller factions. Like, it's the same. Where did they get this 150,000 fighters from? It's the same
Yeah.
people. And some of them are
Just
still wearing their
rebranded.
ISIS patches, you know. There
Yeah.
weren't enough uniforms to go around.
Yeah. And so is your family and your relatives and the people who you know from the Alawite community, so how are things for them? Because I would imagine things are significantly worse in just the last, what is it, 6, 7, 8
Yeah.
months?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people fled. One of my aunties was lucky enough to have been in Lebanon when this happened, and she lives
Yeah.
in a village in the hills of Lataki. This is the one that was, you know, asked for Panadol. She happened to be in Lebanon, thank goodness. So she escaped that, and she's still in Lebanon, too scared to go back. Other family members have fled to Lebanon. I've got an auntie who is cognitively impaired, and she's in a nursing home. I don't know anything about her. I've got another auntie who's married to a Sunni and living in Damascus. I don't know anything about her.
Okay.
My stepmother's family live in Hama countryside, which is now being targeted. And, you know, my stepmother's lost every male in the family in the last 10 years. She's had about 30 or 40 family members get killed. All of her nieces are widows. None of them have husbands, not even her sisters, their husbands, their children, have all been killed in the war, and really horrifically. There's been a lot of losses. Every family has lost somebody. And if you haven't lost somebody, then you've been fired from your job. So a lot of the government jobs, you've been fired on your way to work, you get killed, you get kidnapped, you just random killings, random lootings. For example, my stepmom's sister, when in December, when the coup happened, they left for a few days because they thought, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. So they left their home, and they came back, and their neighbours who were Sunni had brand new cars. So they'd basically gone and looted people's homes and taken their things. And these were their next door neighbours that they've lived next to for like decades. So it's a very scary time. Things seem to have settled a little bit, but it's, you know, there's a lot of, I guess, random attacks. There's definitely been massacres, which are not random. And in fact, there's a Reuters investigation that's just taken place, and that article's just come out this week, saying that the head of government knew what was going on and even praised these terrorists, or the General Security Forces, which is now the new security forces for Syria, aka the previous terrorists, have praised them for the good work they've done. You know, it's absolutely disgusting. You know, if I show you photos of the victims, you've got 2-month-old babies. You've got grandparents. You've got 10-year-old boys that have had their hearts cut out. It's really horrific.
It's just horrible. And when you think about like the amount of focus that there is on all of the like the for example, Palestine, the Gaza situation, the Iran war, what's happened in Israel, like there is so much focus there. Why is it that there is not this level of world attention on what's happening in Syria as well?
Well, I think, a lot of it depends on what the US wants you to see. And as I was saying before, the media, the Middle Eastern media, in particular Al Jazeera and its subsidiaries like Middle East Eye, they're all indirectly owned by Qatar, who is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas. Now, you've got factions of Hamas that actually Syria works with, and then you've got other factions within it that don't. There was some sort of a agreement between Syria and Hamas, because Syria was so when the coup happened in Syria, the terrorists came from Aleppo all the way down to Homs. Now, Homs is where all the weapons are manufactured. So as soon as they came in through there, their first stop was Homs. They destroyed all the weapons factories. And Israel, I don't know if you remember, Israel within 2 days had dropped like 200 bombs and destroyed factories, air bases, military bases, destroyed all of Syria's defense systems, all with Jolani sitting back going, what? I don't know what's going on. Oh, fantastic. Yay, Syria's free. Okay, and like not batting an eyelid. So at least for the last decade, there has been support from Syria to the resistance in Palestine. And of course, there's Iran involvement as well. So Iran, Syria. So this is called the axis of resistance. Syria also supplies Hezbollah, which is also a resistance. Now, in Australia, we call Hezbollah a terrorist group. We call Hamas a terrorist group. Now, my family was personally attacked by Hamas, so I do believe that, there is definitely, that there. But I know that there are different factions within Hamas as well, so I don't know enough about that. But Hezbollah, I don't know if you know the origins of it. Australia calls them a terrorist group, even though they've never done anything outside of Lebanon. They've been falsely accused of it, but it absolutely makes zero sense. Their whole existence is as a result of being invaded by Israel. In 1982. So when Israel marched halfway through to Lebanon, got to Beirut, and then groups of militias joined forces and fought them off and retook Lebanon. Yeah, and then from that point, the Lebanese government has said Hezbollah's always got a place here. Now, it's a political party in Lebanon, so it's not just a militia. It's a political party. Anyway, but so that alliance between Iran, Syria, Hezbollah is what Israel wanted to break. And, at that point, Hezbollah was doing really well on the ground because when Israel sent troops on the ground, they were getting taken by surprise and so on. And it wasn't going too well for them on the ground in the southern border of Lebanon. So they wanted to take out Hezbollah. And that's when they did the pager attack, which has been praised by the US as an act of genius, where children lost their eyes and were killed, and normal civilians, and so what we hear is that Bashar al-Assad was given an ultimatum. You basically stop the flow to Hezbollah, and you blockade and you help us destroy Hezbollah, or you're next. And he's like, no. So literally the next day this all happened, and you can Google this. It's all there. So things turned around very, very, very quickly. And it's the events around December 8th are really, really interesting. But I think the greater things at play were, now's the time we want to take out Hezbollah, and break this axis, and then we'll take Syria. And then we'll take Iran. And what are they doing now? What are they trying to do?
Well, we have been seeing all of that, and it's interesting. It's bizarre how it is also interconnected, and how. Well, would it be safe to say that at least part of the reason why there is this kind of lack of attention to the crisis in Syria is because America, for whatever reason, is so beholden to Israel and to assisting them and supporting them and backing them and funding them that because the coup was essentially Israel backed or Israel assisted, that there is there's no interest in wanting to expose that further for that reason.
Absolutely. And now around in March there was some rumors, Alawites are calling Israel for help. We've always been known to help minorities. And it's like, hang on, no, that's not true. That is not true. So there were all these sort of bits of propaganda aimed at that. And same with the Druze, although the Druze do have historically, some of them, an alliance with Israel, and they serve in the IDF and they live in Israel, and but not all of them. They're split on that too. But yes, they were trying to make it look like Alawites were calling for their help. And I thought, okay, well, who do I prefer, Israel or terrorists? Which one is better? And I'm like, I hope they just take each other out. So it did seem like Israel was going to come in and save us, and then I think there were deals made between, because it seemed like it was Turkey and Israel vying for parts of Syria. And then it seems like they managed to come to a more amicable solution of who would take what. And so now there's been more of a push to try and make Jolani look like a normal guy with a wife who looks half his age. Don't know when he married her. Supposedly it's his wife. And, showing videos of him playing basketball in his suit, he's just a normal guy. He's playing basketball. He's no longer, promoting suicide bombs and chopping heads. That was just a phase. Interestingly, he wears the same shirt and has the same haircut as Zelensky. If you look at a photo side by side, the dark green shirt and the haircut's square. Right. Very interesting. I'm very skeptical, as you can see. But there's been a big push to try and make Jolani out to be a normal guy so that he'll be accepted in the West, so that because it didn't work, the whole let's save Alawites thing didn't work. Israel and Turkey managed to, negotiate what they wanted, instead of Israel pretending like it was going to save Alawites and coming in and taking more of Syria. And so now the US and CNN, all of those groups are trying to whitewash him even more, Jolani. And, the sanctions, as I said, the sanctions have been dropped. The US sanctions have been dropped. The EU dropped them ages ago. Not ages, a couple of months ago. And the US has now dropped them as well. So, and as I said, that seems to be on the back of normalizing with Israel. So, we'll drop the sanctions if you normalize with Israel. So, and I mean, Israel used Syrian airspace to refuel on its way to bomb Iran. So that would never have happened under Assad rule. The Syrian Air Force was pretty good quality. They had good backing from Russia, who basically supplied weapons and training. So they were a pretty good Air Force, but none of that exists anymore. So all gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a sad. That's all. It's just a sad story of how essentially what was a prosperous and pleasant place has been hurt and damaged by all of these ulterior motives that are obfuscated and hidden, and then it's at the end of the day, it is always just the people who suffer.
Absolutely. It's always the people who suffer, it's families like ours that suffer. And I guess, why isn't anybody coming to the aid of Alawites? Well, what have we got to offer? We're just a tiny minority. I know that the Yazidis got some attention from the US because they happen to live near the oil fields, so, there's oil there. And, obviously now in the past, the US was buying the oil for cheap from ISIS. But now they've got their own sort of forces protecting the oil and stealing it. And, Trump's admitted to this. You can watch it. It's out there. This is from years ago when they took out al-Baghdadi, and he then said, now we've got, yes, we're taking all of Syria's oil. So, there was interest in the Yazidis who are a minority and who also get persecuted like Alawites by these terrorists. But unfortunately, there's nothing to gain. As I said, Israel was trying to act like they wanted to save us, but they managed to negotiate something else. So not that we'd ever want them to save us. No, thanks. So there's really, we don't have anything to offer anyone. It's just humanity. If you want to save us for humanity, that's good. But otherwise, there's nothing that we... strategically that we have.
That's and that, like, they all pretend that humanity is always the excuse they give for any of these campaigns in the first place, but obviously it's always something else, and the humanity alone is not reason for them to go in and help.
No, we've seen it through Palestine, what's happening in there,
we
know that's
there's another even more acute example maybe. We have gone a little over what we were planning to go to begin with.
Don't mind.
That's okay. I hope our audience have gotten a lot out of this. You're a wealth of knowledge, so it's been fantastic. Do you think, is there any I'll sort of leave it open canvas, is there any last thing that you wanted to touch on that you think might be relevant to this story that we've either glossed over or missed or something?
I think something important and that really gets me is, understanding that there is a variety of Muslims as there are a variety of Christians, as there is a variety of Jews, as there is a variety of Hindus. Please don't put us all in the same basket, and not all of us want to convert you. Not all of us want to impose Sharia law as they describe it, because, that's their depiction of Sharia law. We're peace-loving. There are no extremists in Alawite religion. It's a very spiritual religion, all about enlightenment and developing oneself. So, just... If there's anything to learn, it's that what you see in the media that's called Islam, that's Wahhabism, and that is a cancer, and that is bad, and it's spreading. And we do need to make sure that it doesn't keep spreading. We need to educate ourselves on what the difference between Wahhabism and Islam is, and we need to make sure that we don't allow it to flourish in Australia, because there are lots of supporters. There are lots of supporters of what's going on in Syria in Australia, and we need to, be careful of that for our own society. Absolutely.
And good, you've given our viewers a bit of homework as well, which they need. And as a teacher, I can appreciate a good bit of holiday homework.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Thank you again so much for your time, Lili. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't already, you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Twitter. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time.